this second part of the rounded and backed cased book, we'll pick up after the sewing, where we finished off in the last video, by adding end papers, gluing the spine, edge trimming, rounding and backing, adding headbands, and finally spine lining. It's a busy video, so let's get started. One of the simplest end papers is tipped on folios front and back, where a folio is a folded sheet of paper. This sheet of paper becomes the paste down on the inside of the boards and the first free end paper, also known as the flyleaf. When you open a modern book, you are usually presented with decorated or coloured paper. I'm going to use 2 folios of coloured paper for the end papers. The paper should be the same weight or heavier than the paper in the book block. Before I apply the end papers, I'll tip the first and last sections to the sections underneath to strengthen the book. According to Bookbinding and the Conservation of Books, a dictionary of descriptive terminology, tipping or tipping in is the process of pasting the edges of a section to adjacent sections. I have an entire video giving an overview of end papers and many videos describing specific different end paper designs. The tipped-on folio was typically used in trade editions of cloth-covered hardbacks in the 19th and 20th centuries. You will find in many older books the tip line will have failed, and this is its weakness. With quality paper and a good PVA, it will last a long time. But on your second binding in this style, I highly recommend you upgrade to a sewn-on end paper. I'll do another standalone video showing an option for this. To tip on the end papers, I apply a 3mm wide line of PVA along the spine fold edge. I'll use one of the folios to guard the other and a piece of folded waste to guard the top folio. Folding the waste gives a nice strong straight edge. When I apply the adhesive, I brush away from the folds to avoid forcing the glue under the masks. I apply the glue once, which sizes the surface, and then a second time, which gives a nice even coverage of adhesive. I pitch the folios to the spine of the book, making sure to align perfectly at the head and tail, and the fold aligned with the sections underneath. It can be a good idea to make the end paper folio larger than the book block and then trim it down with a knife after tipping in, or they get trimmed with the rest of the book when the edges are trimmed. An end paper with a lot of overhang can be a nuisance when trimming the edges. I'll put the book block between some boards and knock up to the head and spine, then drawing back the boards a bit from the spine, I place it in a finishing press with about 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch sticking out. This will give just about the right compression of the spine. I'm aiming for that 25 to 30% swell. Now I can glue the spine. Don't glue the tapes yet. We need these to be able to move for rounding and backing. I want a good thin covering of glue. Too much will make rounding and backing difficult and the spine stiff and the book harder to open. I want to make sure there is glue all along between each section. The best way to achieve this is to rub it in with your fingers. This also takes off any excess adhesive. A damp rag is handy for quickly cleaning glue off your fingers. At the head and tail, brush away from the book to avoid getting glue on the ends of the book block. You can use a bone folder to close the sewing holes either side of the tapes a bit. As soon as the spine glue is no longer tacky, I'll quickly trim the book so I can round it while the glue is still soft. I'll quickly trim all 3 edges of the book block with the guillotine. I protect the swell with a compensation board. If you were going to do edge decoration, you would do it right after cutting the edges. If I was ploughing the edges, I would first plough the foredge, then round to distribute the swell, and then cut the head and tail. If you don't have a guillotine or a plough, you can try trimming with a knife, but this is very difficult. The best options are either to leave the edges untrimmed and make it a feature, or to trim each section to the same size before sewing, which can produce a very nice result. Now is a good time to mark the height of the shoulders, as the spine edge of the book is crisp and it's easy to measure from. I was taught that English style joints have the shoulders 1.5 times the board thickness. I'm going to use a heavy board for this book, 2.4 millimeters thick. If the book was thinner, I'd use the next board size down, which is 1.8 millimeters thick. I'm not convinced that shoulders 1.5 board thicknesses is a good idea. I'm going to use just a bit thicker and make the shoulders 3 millimeters. Besides, I don't think I'm that laser precise that I could create shoulder heights to the fraction of a millimeter. I also check the diagonals to make sure the book is square. I should have done this first thing after trimming with the guillotine. I'll use my hammer to round the book. I'll moisten the fingers of my left hand so they have some grip on the paper, and I put my thumb into the foredge, pull the upper part of the book away from the spine, and then use glancing blows with the hammer to start to shape the spine. I'll gradually work to the level of round I want, flipping the book when needed. Many sources will tell you to aim for 1/3 of a circle. I prefer to round a bit less and aim for 1/4 of a circle. The thicker the book, the more important the round is. The rounding and backing is like a stone arch and stops the book block sagging in the boards. A flat arch is not as strong as a high arch. Now it's time to put the shoulders on the book in the step called backing. I'll put wedged shaped backing boards either side of the spine and put these in a press. I'm going to try using the new Schmidt press, even though I think it will be too lightweight, but I want to give it a try and see. I want the top of the boards aligned with the 3 millimeter shoulder marks that I drew earlier. I'm using Wiesner backing boards which have locator pins and brass edges for the top. It is common to use backing boards which are just wood and don't have locating pins. The brass stops the top edges being beaten up by the hammer, requiring regular planing, while being soft enough not to damage the hammer. The locating pins help with getting everything aligned. Unfortunately, the Schmidt press didn't work out. The screws are too low below the spine of the book, and it caused the top of the press to yawn open. I couldn't get the backing boards to stay in place or put sufficient pressure on the book. The Frank Wiesner copy of the Dryad finishing press with the stand will do the job, and I did learn this book using a genuine Dryad press like this, but it is a bit lightweight too. A heavier laying or lying press is the proper tool for the job. Before taking the hammer to the spine of the book, it is a good idea to see how much you can back just using your thumbs and a bone folder. Work from the centre out to the ends, The ends are the hardest part to get right because there's no sewing inside the sections, providing the swell and support which makes the backing possible. It is possible to back a book with no swell, but it requires brute force and isn't the best for the paper. Some people hate backing with a hammer because they feel it's too damaging to the paper. By having sufficient swell and aiming for less sharp shoulders, it is possible to do. I have a video all about backing, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. There is a bit to it. Getting everything into position is very important. It can be like stuffing a cat into a bag. It just doesn't want to go. You just need to take your time and get it right. You work the book and backing boards down into the press and gradually do up the pressure. Once everything is in position, you can get the press pin and do the lying press up very tight. Having a large, strong press for backing really helps. The wedge-shaped backing boards direct the force of the press into the shoulders and the book starts to back itself. Once the book is backed as much as it wants to be, take it out of the press. From now on, you should protect the shoulders by always laying it on something so the shoulders aren't squashed. You can crisp up the shoulders by pushing one of the boards into the shoulder and then using a bone folder to draw up and back over the shoulder. I'm going to add decorative machine-made headbands. They are very appropriate for this style of book. You can make your own glue-on headbands by rolling some material, such as thin leather or decorative paper or thin cloth, over a piece of thin cord. You could sew headbands, but I think that's a bit fancy for a cased book. But then again, sometimes it's nice to dress up. I just cut them to the width of the book and then stick them on with PVA. The cloth can really soak up the adhesive, so I put glue on both the headband and the book. Later, I'll notice one is slightly too wide and I'll trim it up, and at the same time I'll put little dabs of glue on each end of the headbands to stop the embroidered bit from unravelling. I matched the colour of the headband to the cover paper and cloth. The first spine lining I'll apply is some scrim, also known as mull or super. I've always liked the analogy of it being like the reinforcement in concrete. By itself, it's not very strong, but once laminated between board and paper with a strong adhesive, it adds significantly to the board attachment. The inner joint of cased books is maybe their weakest point, and this scrim adds a lot of strength to it. Scrim is just a starched, loose weave cotton. You can substitute with all manner of things. You can starch some cheesecloth, calico, light cotton, or even use a heavier, long fibre paper. If you don't have starch, you can use it without, but it will be more difficult to work being a bit floppy. I cut it roughly to width, which is the width of the spine plus a few inches or 10 centimetres, and the height is to fit between the headbands but not go over them. Scrim does tear easier in one direction over the other, and it would be best to have the harder to tear direction going head to tail. I never bother checking this. If I want maximum strength, I instead cut it on the bias. To apply it, I glue out the spine completely, except the headbands. Now is when the tapes are finally glued. I pull the scrim down over the spine to get it initially seated, and then using some baking paper as rubbing down paper, I work it thoroughly down. The glue will force its way through the scrim. The second and final spine lining for this book is kraft paper. It's very important that the grain direction of the kraft paper is head to tail. I cut a piece the width from shoulder to shoulder and longer than the book. I glue over the headbands and trim it to length after it's dried. The paper behind the headbands provides them some support. Kraft paper is a long fibred, high wet strength paper originally made for making paper sacks. This makes it perfect for spine lining. I glue out the spine of the book completely, going over the headbands but trying to not get any on the top of them. Before I apply the kraft paper to the spine, I moisten it with some water. This will make it curl and match the shape of the spine. Once in position, I work it down, getting rid of any wrinkles with my bone folder through rubbing down paper. Once the spine is dry, I'll carefully trim the spine lining behind the headbands. I'll slightly undercut them so the paper can't be seen. The final job for today is to trim up the scrim and tapes. I'm going to cut the scrim to 25mm or 1 inch wide. I mark it and cut it with scissors. My ruler happens to be 25mm wide, so I don't really need to measure it. But maybe you want your scrim to be 30mm wide. There is no magic to 25mm, and a bit more or less would be fine. It's traditional to cut the ends of the scrim at a small angle and to cut the tapes to the width of the scrim also at a slight angle. Here is where I decide I want to slightly trim one of the headbands, and remember I didn't seal each end to stop them unravelling. In the next video, I'll continue by making the case, and in the final video, we'll bring the case and book block together by casing in. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and select the notification bell. Until next time, cheerio.